Hi and welcome back to MDriven overview, MDriven designer overview. This will be session 5. So we ended off the last session with creating a modal dialog that allowed us to pick tenants to our house. So we could pick persons that would create lease contracts. When we used this dialog all persons to pick the tenants from, and as you can imagine, this strategy simply will not hold if we have 1 million persons. This is good when we have 100 maybe, but we can't really trust on all instances to come to the rescue for every scenario. We really desperately need some way to seek the database without instantiating the objects in memory in the client or in the prototyper. So how do we go about that in the view model pattern that we have? We do it like this. We right click and among the nesting choices we have add a search expression. And search expressions are expressions that are supposed to be executed in persistent storage. So that will be a database if your backend is connected to one, or it will be the XML file in our case where we prototype against the XML file. And if we are in turnkey, it will be the persistence mapper that in turn will question the backing database. All right, so let's just go ahead and add a search expression, or maybe better yet, we will do a new view model to keep the search in, and we will call this person search, and we type it to be person. Right click, and in the nested view models add search expression. And what happened here was that 3 columns were added to the root, and one of the columns was a variable called vSeekResult. This variable was created and added to the view model. Well, it wasn't because it's implicit, but it should be. In newer versions it will be. So variables are, just as they sound, something that we can define in the view model and is only available in the view model scope. So this one should be of collection person. This is where our result is gonna end up from a search, and that one we connect to a search result grid. So we have another variable, vSeekParam, that is defined as a string. So we have a column in the UI that lets the user enter criteria, and we have a search button, and the search button has the OCL expression self vm.search. Self VM is a special instance that is available in view models only from OCL. Let's see what it contains. Self VM dot, and from here we can do things as refresh, save, search, and a few other things like PS expression refresh. We can come back to these in later sessions, but for now we're just gonna use the self VM search. What the search operator does is it looks for search expressions in the view model. And this is a search expression. It's just another view model nesting, but what separates this from the other nestings is that it's not connected to anything. It just sits here in the middle. It doesn't need to be in the middle. Just because I said so, I can right click this and move this one up. So, and a search expression is typed, and it has criterias. Criterias are just columns. You can have many criteria per search expression. The criterias are merged together with the OCL operator intersection. So what if this criteria is true and we had another, or this criteria returned 5 persons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and we had another one that returned 2 persons, 4 and 5. The intersection will take what's equal between the two domains, so 4 and 5. But the search expression, the criteria, is just another OCL. But what's different about this is that it's the persistent storage subset of SQL, OCL PS. It says up here in the editor when we enter it. And then we don't have access to every single operator. We can't concatenate strings, etc. in this language. Its main purpose is to be easily transformed to SQL and executed as an SQL query to the database. And the database will return a number of identities that we will in turn interpret as persons and load person objects. So what we do is select, and we have a loop variable called A, and then the mechanism to create the search expression added all this for us. It just took the first string attribute of the class that we had set, person, and that was first name, and said, well, it's not unlikely that that is what you as a developer want to limit the search on. This attribute, SQL-like vseek param, and ends with a percentage sign, just like in the SQL operator like. So if you want to find both start and if you want to find values that equals in the middle, then you would go something like this. So this will be a resulting string that's fed into the SQL-like, that of course will be translated into a like operator in SQL. But as we are running against an XML file, it will do something similar. Just execute the operator on that. So is this really what we want? Well, we want to also check if it's the last name maybe. So I use or, and then I use last name, like that. And what should I show for a result? Well, I can show the things I have, first name and last name. So let's do one thing more in this view. If you don't find what you expect, you might want to have somewhere where you can create a new person. So let's go to the action definitions for this dialog, and let's do a view model action and say that we should show it on the root and say new person, and the execute expression on this one should be person create. Having done that, we can see if we can save this, push the play button, start system, run model and continue. Oh, we never created an action to actually show the seeker view model. So person search, I right click on this and say add a global action for show. Okay, then it's shown here, but we probably want to sort into a menu group. So I double click it, find it here, set menu group seekers maybe. So this is might be where I want to put all my search dialogues. Who knows? Having done that, I head back to this one, model refresh seekers, show person search, and I can search, but I only want those that has an A in them. That's the only one. Okay, but what if someone's missing? I can create a new person and call that Anders, like that. And now if I search for AN, I should find Anderson, but since my XML file is well, I guess is case sensitive. Yeah. It's case sensitive. So if we don't like that, we should have used the operator called SQLite case insensitive, right? So now we have the searcher. Let's go back to the house view where we added the pick tenants action. So the pick tenants action, let's do a copy of this. No, where did it go? Let's do a copy of this. I'm just gonna do copy and paste and pick tenants by search, and that one should bring up the person search instead, and if it does, it cannot check this because that variable doesn't exist in that UI. Instead it calls search result grid if that is empty. Okay, and this expression won't go either because same problem. Like that, and it adds the tenants if I have selected any. So if we head back here, we see that we have another action, pick tenants by search. Of course, in the end, I only want one of these, and most likely it's the by search that will survive, and then maybe I will change its name. Model refresh, houses, and pick one here. This doesn't have any tenants. I'm gonna pick tenants by search. I'm gonna search on, I find this one and I add that one. So I find it rather disturbing that I don't see the name here. This is what I talked about before in session 2 or something. It's first when we do the UI and watch the information together that it's obvious that of course we need to see the name here. That's a new requirement, but it's obvious now that we see the result. And not a problem. This is the grid, which is this one, which points to this one, and let's add the columns. And add a generic column, and in that generic column sets an expression that follows the role to tenant and the first name. Oh, that's the OCL letter acting up when you don't have a separate first name. And you might have noticed that I quite a lot of times had a need to concatenate the first and the last name, because that's simply how we refer to persons. So this sort of this pattern comes back again and again. We're gonna solve this in just a minute. Just gonna save the fact that we did a new column, and we call that tenant name, and we might want to give that a little more space, like 3 columns, and we might want to drag this one to the end here and over there, and this one we added in some other session, but it's just what we want. So if I save and refresh and look at all the houses, was it this one? Anderson, but I don't want it there, I want it first. And let's show the grid lines, yeah, like that. Refresh, like that, and that's pretty obvious. And how come this isn't even showing? Well, it's too tight to show with this style. So how would you solve that? Well, as you can see, we are cramming everything into one grid cell here. So we're gonna insert a column and give this one more space for the presentation. Let's give it 2, and just to make things look straight, we're gonna give the rest of them 2 as well, like that. And head back, refresh, views, all houses, and when I click it, oh, it's still crap, but you get the general idea. I would just insert yet another column. Let's just do that one for, and refresh. Like that. So, and this is important, how quickly we can go from feedback with our eyes that this isn't good, back to design, how should it be instead, back to verification, okay, it's fine. It really saves everybody's time. Okay, enough about that. I said that this pattern is repeated again and again. Yes, it is. First name and last name. It's a really common scenario that we want to refer to persons by their full name. So what we probably would want to do is add an attribute that is called full name, but that wouldn't be very normalized to store the first name and the last name and the full name. So let's make that one derived. That's another attribute mode. It's not persistent as it is not stored in the database. It's derived as it's calculated from other values that we do have. So I can paste in that one, and now that was for the tenants, and I don't want that. I'm gonna because now we're in the scope of a person. So first name and last name. This makes up the full name. And now when we have done this, we can make use of it in our view models or wherever we access model information. So instead of doing this, we can just as well do the full name, like that. And now it's gray. I was expecting it to be pink because it is derived. I wonder why that was. It's derived. Yeah, don't have an answer. But gonna say, what do you say? Self is not no, that was just wrong. save and head back and model refresh, and there's really no difference. But like here, now that we have it, let's use it. So tenant's last name, tenant's full name is full name, like that. Refresh. Like that. And if I were to change the name, the right attributes work like this. They are always subscribed. So let's head back to this view and add it as well, just to prove a point. All persons. Oops. Add column full name, like that. Give it some space when it's in a grid, 2, maybe 3. Refresh. Views, show all persons. As soon as I change one of the values that build up the derivation will kick in and invalidate, and as the UI looks at this value, it will force it to refresh, getting the parts of the value and re-evaluate it. So when I write Hans, it will be updated, and if I were to change anything, it will be updated. And that might be Xmed, right? So derivations is also available for associations. So what we could do if we want to know where the person lives is, of course, to follow to see the rented apartments and look up the street for that house. But if that is a common operation that we want to do, we could also add a association straight from person to streets. And since I can rent many apartments, I potentially have many addresses. So if I want to derive this from available information, I would say that the association is derived, and I would take this end. This end will have no value, so I will say that it is non-navigable. Is navigable, false, because if I would want to go from street to persons, that would be another derivation that would have another expression. But this one should have a derivation expression that it starts in person and it goes to here is the one that is derived. It goes to owned house, no, to lease contract, and from lease contract rented apartments. and from rented apartments, the street. Oops, I really must fix that. The street. So this will be a collection of streets. And if we were to show this in our UI, I guess we could add column. Add a generic column. And I follow the relation to streets, and that has a name. But since this is a collection of strings, we need some way to display it in a single cell that we will do here in the grid. And then an operator that's real handy for these cases as comma list. So it will take all the strings in the collection and append them as with a comma in between. So lives at. So heading back to model refresh, views, all persons. So here we see the addresses where they live. Okay, so good. We have covered a lot of ground. We have mentioned derivations for attributes, like the full name, derivations for associations, like the street, even if it was kind of silly, because we probably would like the street number to get the precise address, and that's not possible this way. We have covered the idea of being able to seek in a vast database, and we also mentioned variables that are available in view models. So I'm gonna show you another thing. What if we are in a situation where we actually need some test data? We need a lot of persons to verify that our idea to search in a larger amount is valid. And of course we could run the prototyper and press we added a new person action here, and we could press that 1,000 times to enter the first and last name. But is there a better way, you ask? And since I'm talking about it, you have probably guessed that there is. I go into the run button again because I need a context that we are in the XML persistence. We're going to start the system and we're going to go into the legacy debugger. And in here we have a tab over here, import tab separated. So tab separated data import via name view model. So what it says is, given tab separated data and a view model name, assumes row 1 in data to be view model column and creates instances of view model class. So basically, if we have some data that we paste in here, we should be able to create objects of a certain class. But it also says that we need a view model. So let's create one. As you see, the view models are used over and over for different purposes. Import persons and type person. And let's assume that the first name is the first value and the last name is the second value. So that's about it. And given that, I should be able to say that this is the view model I want to use. Oh, maybe I need to reread this. I do. Quick save, start legacy debugger and import tab separated and view model and get header from view model. Okay, first name, last name. All right, where can I get that? Well, I found this site. I googled for a list of names and you find anything on Google. List of random names. Let's do 50 male and female and, well, no, alliteration when you start at the same. So okay. Now I want to grab these list in text area. That's great. I wonder if this is tab separated. It probably isn't. I'm gonna start a notepad. All right. So is that a tab? No, that's a tab. I copy a tab. I do. I want to do a search and replace here. Replace. I'm gonna look for space and paste in my tab and replace it all. And copy those and head back to my importer and paste those and go. So that means I got a lot of dirty objects here that I will save like that and head back to my, this one is, I'm gonna restart and person search, and I have some test data to work on. Oh, let's see everyone that starts either their first or last name with T, or has a T in it, really, because that was what we said in the criteria. Okay, so that means that when we do houses and we want to assign tenants by search, and we do everyone with a big T, because it was case sensitive as we found out, and select them and press OK, then we have those as tenants. All right, moving on. As we see the tenants here, but they haven't got an apartment number and they haven't got a rent figure, but they really should. This is important information. It's so important that we might want to add a constraint on our class lease contract to make sure that the user of the system is made aware of the importance of these values. So I select the class and I select constraints, and I get a little dialog where I can add constraints. This constraint, I give a name, must have apartment number. That's the name of my constraint so that I can refer to it, and I want to have a description as well, and I'm going to make easy for myself just to do something like this. Right, maybe we, yeah. And the expression is more or less self apartment number well, it should be not null, right? Shouldn't be null. And then now we got that symbol that says that this has one constraint. So when we look at our diagrams, we will see that, whoa, this is constrained some way. Okay, so if we were to head back to our prototyper and show the house, oh, we see must have apartment number, but there's really no information on who is missing the apartment number. Let's head back to the constraint. And in the description, we can actually access attributes. Or yeah, so we can go like this, as string within the larger than and smaller than, greater than tags to say that we want to describe the default presentation here. Can you please inject that? And what is the default presentation? Default string representation on lease contract is none. Okay, but we might follow the link to the person and use the full name. Again, we made use of the derived full name. Like that, save, and head back, refresh, view all houses. So Hans Carlsen must have an apartment number and Dick Smith must have apartment number. And as I give Hans Carlsen an apartment number 1, that is removed. And as I give Dick 1, 2, that is removed as well. So that's a good way to feed back information to the user about what needs to be filled in. But it might not be enough for us. We might need to stress this even harder, depending on use case. So there's more ways to signal the user that something needs to be done. If we check the house view here, we had the variables that we don't use in this view. We use them in the seeker, but we also have the constraints. So these are the constraints that we found in the classes that are used here. So it's just one, and depending on use case, we might not want to show it, because who knows, the view might not even contain the apartment number, so no need to stress the user about entering it if it isn't really possible. So then we could just opt it out, but we want to have it opt in because it's good for us. But what we could do is something more precise as a validation rule. Let's right click up in the top and add a validation rule. So we got rule 1. And the rule 1 is that let's say it's the fact that the selected what I want to do is to highlight something here, apartment number, to make the user see this. So what is this? This is here, the lease contract. So what I want to do in my validation rule is to find a variable the current, the lease contract, and check that one, that particular one that's on screen or selected at the moment, and check that for apartment number, and verify that it isn't null. And I can write something, please supply number, like that. But we still haven't been able to say that this rule is supposed to show up for this field. So I can select the field, it's over here, and I'm supposed to find it, validation rules. My menus really turn out the wrong end all the time. Validation rules, rule 1, please supply number. Okay, so that would be one way to further steer our user to see something. But how does it look? Refresh, view, houses. It doesn't show anything, but if I null that out, first I get this one, and I also get the red information here. Actually, depending on what style you use, it really renders differently, so that you can control in. Oh, that wasn't very nice. Save and back. You can control this, and then we have examples where you just have an exclamation mark that when you point at it, it states what's wrong with it. So, and this is another important thing I should mention, that when you have errors and there's something updated in the information and you try to save, then it will ask you, there are errors in the information, do you really want to save anyway? Hans Carlsen must have apartment number. And the system won't stop you from saving, and this is an important principle, I think, that you shouldn't stop the user from entering information even if it isn't correct. Then it's better to monitor all the information that is incorrect so that they can come back to it and update it. Don't stop users from entering data. Make the UI very clear what you expect, but you should always honor the user's request to save. And maybe you should work with the quality attributes like states that you can't go into approved before you have an apartment number or the rent in dollars. But you shouldn't stop them from saving. Okay, that's just my very clear view on this. Okay, so I'm gonna save anyway. But rather nice, wouldn't you say, just having the error information this way. So whenever I enter something, the error goes away, and of course I don't get the warning when I save. But that was not a very good style for this example, so I'm gonna switch back like that. Okay. So let's add another constraint and make that not an arrow constraint, but rather look at the other types of constraints. So we have a constraint rent and the description, and we do as before as string lives free, and we don't do then an arrow, just an information, and the expression would be self and rent not null, because when the expression is true, then the constraint is fulfilled and we don't show anything. But as soon as the constraint is not true, then it's broken, and then we show things, warnings, etc. In this case, information. Refresh. And now it's a little white thing. Hans Carlson lives free. Dick Smith lives free. How come? That shouldn't be the case. Like that. And like that. Save. All right. I wonder if we will have time to cram in reports in this so that we could do rents slips for these guys. I think maybe we will come back to that in the next session. So we will round this off, and thank you very much for following along with these tutorials, and I'll be back.